My cousin made a false accusation against me, claiming that I had committed a serious act against her when we were children. This horrible event occurred almost a decade ago, and now, after all this time, my family has suddenly begun to reach out to me again. Reflecting on my upbringing, I realized that I grew up in what many might consider a typical household. My parents worked long hours, but they still found time to care for me and my 3 older sisters. We were not particularly close as a family, but there were no major conflicts or issues either. The same can be said for my extended family. They lived a few hours away, and we would see each other every summer or during the Christmas holidays. Those gatherings went smoothly, and we got along well, even if the bond wasn't incredibly strong. As we grew older, life took us in different directions, and it was only natural that we would drift apart. I'm now 31 years old, but a significant turning point in my life occurred back in 2014, when I was just 22 and attending university. One fateful day, I received a phone call from my mother that would completely change the course of my life. At that moment, I was immersed in a video game session with friends and initially ignored her call. However, when she called again almost immediately, I recognized that this was serious. In our family, there was an unspoken rule: if someone calls twice in a row, it's important, often the kind of important that suggests bad news, like the death of a loved one. So, I excused myself from the game and answered her call, only to be met with chaos on the other end. I could hear people arguing, voices overlapping in a panic. When my mom realized I had picked up, she seemed to leave the tumultuous scene to find some privacy, closing the door behind her. I could sense something was terribly wrong, and as I asked her what was happening, I heard her sobs. The conversation is a blur in my memory, but essentially, she asked me if I had anything to confess regarding my cousin, E, who is 7 years younger than I am and was only 15 at the time. It had been years since I had seen E, so I replied with a simple, no, and pressed her for more information about what this was all about. As she continued to cry, her accusations grew more intense. She claimed that he had told my sister about an incident from our childhood. Supposedly, he said that when she was 9 and I was 16, she had come into my room, and I had inappropriately touched her and kissed her. My mom was frantic, demanding that I say something, but I was at a loss for words. It felt so absurd, I thought it had to be some kind of terrible joke. The only coherent response I managed to muster was to deny the accusation and insist that he was lying. Despite my protests, my mom relayed how he had described the events in vivid detail. She kept pressing me with questions like, "Did you do this?" and "Did you do that?" Each time, I screamed back a fervent, "No." The call ended with my parents putting me on speakerphone, and both of them expressed their desire to sever all ties with me, instructing me never to contact them again. Later that day, 2 of my sisters texted me, calling me disgusting, and promptly blocked me. In a surreal twist, after that devastating call, I found myself heading to take a long shower, an instinctive reaction that still baffles me. Once I calmed down, I attempted to reach out to everyone, including E, but no one would answer. Those who hadn't already blocked my number quickly did so. The only response I received was from my father, who told me to stop contacting them, emphasizing that they needed to heal. That was 9 years ago, and since that day, I haven't spoken to a single member of my family. To say that this event devastated me would be a massive understatement. The weeks following that phone call felt like a hazy nightmare, and I barely managed to eat during that time. This was painfully coincidental as it happened right before I was supposed to defend my bachelor's thesis, adding a layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. Thankfully, my co-writer sensed that something was off and took charge of the conversation during the defense, allowing me to handle the easier parts. Without his intervention, I likely would have failed. Unsurprisingly, no one from my family attended my graduation, an event that, under normal circumstances, should have been a joyous occasion. What followed was arguably the worst period of my life. For the first year, I lived in constant dread, waiting for the police to knock on my door and arrest me for sexual abuse. I struggled to find work, relying solely on my dwindling savings. I turned to drinking heavily and abusing oxycodone, grappling with feelings of resentment and uncontrollable anger. The only reason I didn't lash out at someone was that there was practically no one around me. At one point, my neighbor even called the cops on me after witnessing me smash a glass in a fit of rage, but I managed to convince the officers that it was just an accident, and they left after confirming there were no other people in my apartment. Instead of sleeping, my nights were consumed with dark thoughts and plans for retribution. The thoughts I had while planning how to inflict pain on E were dark and troubling. I was consumed with ideas about how to hurt her and meticulously crafted scenarios in my mind to ensure that no one would ever discover my intentions. I even contemplated taking it a step further than what she had accused me of, envisioning acts that were far more severe. This wasn't something I took pride in, rather, it was a reflection of my pain and turmoil. In late 2015, I finally landed my first real job in my chosen field, and it marked a significant turning point in my life. The responsibilities of my job provided me with a sense of normalcy that I desperately needed. I threw myself into my work, which served as a welcome distraction from my troubled thoughts. Though the journey of recovery was gradual and filled with its own set of challenges, I began to drink less and found myself smiling more often. My newfound focus on work allowed me to live frugally while earning a decent income. To celebrate my birthdays, I made it a point to treat myself to special gifts. Over the years, these gifts ranged from a VR headset to a motorcycle, and from sets of Lego to various items that brought joy into my life. Last year marked another significant milestone. I moved out of my unfortunate apartment and purchased a small house, fulfilling a long-held dream of mine. Having my own garage and a garden to tend was something I had envisioned for years, and this change positively impacted my mental state. Life seemed to be improving overall, yet I still carried the weight of unresolved issues. For the past few years, I have been taking antidepressants. While they do help in dulling the darker thoughts, they replace them with a feeling of emotional numbness. My ability to trust others has been severely eroded, making dating a daunting prospect. I've attempted to connect with a couple of women, but those experiences resulted in just 2 awkward dates. When faced with meaningful conversations, particularly regarding my family, I often find myself at a loss for words. It's hard to imagine explaining to a potential partner that my family had accused me of a grave crime, leaving our relationship strained and distant. The only woman I truly communicate with is my therapist, who has become a crucial part of my support system. Recently, I was taken aback when I received a text message from my mother. I hesitated for hours, staring at the notification and feeling a mixture of anxiety and disbelief before finally deciding to open it. The initial message felt like an emotional bombshell. In it, she greeted me warmly and conveyed that it had been far too long since we last spoke, expressing how much they missed me and genuinely wanted to know how I had been holding up. She included updates about my sisters and mentioned my nieces and nephews, revealing that I had become an uncle without even realizing it. The second message followed soon after. It carried a tone of understanding, acknowledging that I might not want to interact with them due to the past events. They recounted a recent family gathering where he had minimized her accusations against me, eventually admitting that perhaps nothing had really occurred, and that her claims may have originated from a dream. This revelation caused a stir among our family, and in light of this, my parents expressed their regret for how they had treated me. They recognized the wrongness of their actions, expressed their anger toward E, and emphasized their desire to reconnect. And now, here I am, grappling with an intense turmoil of emotions. I haven't replied yet, but I am certain they're aware that I saw their messages. The memories of past traumas are surfacing again, and I feel a boiling anger toward my family. Part of me craves to confront them, to unleash all my pent-up feelings and force them to face the consequences of their actions, to make them feel the discomfort and guilt that I have endured. At the same time, another part of me wants to simply ignore their attempts to reconnect and continue living my relatively stable life, one filled with the simple pleasures of riding my motorcycle and nurturing my garden. My social circle is non-existent. The few people I talk to are my co-workers, but we don't share any deep connections. My attempts to reach out to my therapist's clinic were met with disappointment, as she is currently on vacation and unavailable for weeks. This leaves me feeling isolated, with only the anonymity of the internet to turn to for support. Now I find myself at a crossroads, wondering whether I should respond to my parents' messages and, if so, what that response might consist of. The idea of meeting them in person feels far too overwhelming, and I'm unsure how picking at those old wounds could affect my already fragile state of being. For a long time, I've imagined the moment when they might finally give me the apology I've been waiting for. In my daydreams, it's dramatic, them throwing themselves on the ground and kissing my feet, begging for forgiveness for all the pain they caused me. Now, when I think about it, the idea of a simple text message feels so anticlimactic in comparison. The roots of this conflict trace back to a difficult accusation made by a cousin, who falsely claimed that I had done something terrible. For nearly a decade, my family distanced themselves from me, but now, almost 10 years later, they have suddenly started reaching out to me again. It's been about 3 months since I wrote my last post, and during this time, a significant amount has happened in my life, some events better, some worse. One thing that remains constant, however, is my cousin E, who continues to be a source of frustration. Just about a week after my family reached out, she sent me a lengthy apology via text message. When I first saw it, I was stunned. In her message, she talked about her struggles with mental health, suggesting that these issues somehow justified her previous actions against me. E claimed she needed help and mentioned that her parents were supporting her in getting that help. To me, this sounded like an excuse. I have known E for most of my life. She was once a joyful, vibrant girl, but everything changed on that dreadful day in 2014. Her message felt like a way to deflect responsibility, culminating in what was essentially a half-hearted apology. Initially, I had planned to move on with my life, focusing on gradually healing from the wounds of the past. But after receiving E's text, I hit my breaking point. I felt compelled to respond, using the harshest words I could muster. In the end, my actual reply was pointed and intense. I expressed the depth of my pain, telling her, "You think your mental struggles are tough? Try being cut off from your family for 10 years when you were just starting out in adulthood, and see how those problems escalate." I am still grappling with the fallout from all of this, and the last thing I need is the very person who contributed to my misery offering up a stream of excuses about her behavior. While it might be true that my other relatives were unaware of everything that transpired, E knew everything, and it never occurred to her to speak out sooner. I made it clear that she was fortunate I hadn't harmed myself during this ordeal. Regarding my parents and siblings, that's a different narrative altogether. While I may harbor some hope for reconciliation, I know that I cannot forgive E for the irreversible damage she has inflicted upon me and my relationships. I concluded my message with a strong sentiment. I wished for her to suffer the consequences of her actions and to never reach out to me again. Although she hasn't replied, I can see that my message was received, as indicated by the read receipts. In a more positive light, I did respond to my parents as well. My text to them was straightforward. We had already discussed much over the phone. Hearing their voices was disorienting since I had always associated those sounds with a sense of safety. However, after everything that transpired, those familiar voices now brought back a flood of sour memories from the last time we spoke. The conversation lasted 3 to 4 hours, and while it was challenging for all of us, it became the most productive discussion I've had with them in a long time. I had anticipated excuses similar to those I received from E, but to my surprise, they apologized profusely and acknowledged their wrongdoings. They revealed that the burden of their decisions had weighed heavily on their conscience over the years. The most difficult moment came when I asked them why they had chosen to believe E over me, their own son. They admitted that they struggled with the situation but felt convinced by E's narrative, which made their choice appear reasonable at the time. I told them that instead of cutting contact, they should have at least attempted to get me help, asserting that they had given me nothing to work with during my darkest hours. They confessed that they recognized this truth, and it was painfully clear how much suffering their absence had caused. They revealed that after the first couple of years, they had wanted to reach out and rekindle our relationship, but they feared that my demeanor would only worsen the situation. This frustrated me. I reminded them that their priority should have been my well-being as their son, regardless of how I might have been behaving. Ultimately, we reached a tentative agreement to stay in touch, though I made it clear that visiting them would not be on the table at this point. While there remains a great deal of unresolved anger within me, this is at least a small step forward in the right direction. The depth of hatred I once harbored for them was overwhelming. It consumed much of my heart and mind. Yet, despite that darkness, a flicker of hope emerged, suggesting that things could improve. This glimmer is why I've found myself feeling somewhat happy, especially since that pivotal phone call that changed everything. Since then, we've made a point to check up on each other regularly, and gradually, our conversations are beginning to resemble the warmth and familiarity they used to have. There's even the thought of visiting them someday lingering in the back of my mind, though I remain uncertain about when that might happen or how it will unfold. The prospect of reconnecting with those who effectively threw me out of their lives is daunting. My cousin's false accusations of sexual assault created a rift that felt insurmountable. After nearly 10 years of silence, my family is reaching out to me again, and I find myself navigating this complex situation. So, here's the latest update on my journey with E and the aftermath of the accusations. It's been about 4 to 5 months since my last entry, and thankfully, I have better news to share. As I move forward, many people have suggested that I consider legal action against E, urging me to sue her for the pain she inflicted. While I cannot deny the unforgivable nature of her actions, I believe that pursuing legal recourse would not be productive. The events of the past decade have weighed heavily on me, and my desire is simply to reach a resolution and put this behind me once and for all. The financial burden of court proceedings is another hurdle I cannot afford at this time. Moreover, I think about the fact that he never chose to take things to court either. Even though I know that's not a valid justification, it lingers in my thoughts. Maintaining communication with my parents has been a surprising development. In fact, just about a week ago, I made the decision to visit them, an event I approached with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. They have distanced themselves from E, which in some ways parallels the punishment I believe she deserves. Experiencing the same isolation I endured feels like a form of justice. The visit itself went surprisingly well. I have chosen to take my time, so I haven't yet seen the rest of my family, but the dinner with my parents was a bittersweet relief. Leading up to our reunion, I had grappled with how to greet the people whose actions had shattered my normal life. My initial expectations were heavy with dread. Surprisingly, when I saw them, the overwhelming hatred I thought would dominate my emotions took a backseat. Instead, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't anticipated. Perhaps seeing them again signified the possibility of returning to some semblance of normalcy in my life. Our conversation was anything but easy. In fact, it was rather grueling. I found myself expressing the pain and hurt they had caused me over the years, and while I hadn't intended to unleash my feelings so forcefully, it felt necessary to clearly convey the depth of my suffering. My mother, visibly moved, shed tears as I recounted my darkest moments. They openly acknowledged that they cannot undo the past, but expressed a desire to cultivate a more optimistic future. They even broached the idea of me coming home for Christmas and reconnecting with the extended family, to which I responded by sharing my preference for a gradual approach. I indicated that while I might be open to that idea, I wanted to move at my own pace. Gradually, the intense feelings of hatred that once dominated my heart are dissipating, and I'm beginning to recognize a shift within myself. It's difficult to put into words, but I feel like a better person overall. This heavy burden that has lingered for a decade is starting to lift. Free from the weight of judgment, I can see a brighter path ahead. On a lighter note, I have started dating again and have met a wonderful girl who I am becoming serious with. Life is undeniably improving. For the first time in years, I genuinely feel like things are on the upswing. Who knows what the next decade will hold, but the prospect of a brighter future is invigorating. To everyone reading this, I hope my story resonates with you and serves as a reminder that healing is possible, even if it takes a decade to get there.